This is Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook, Chapter 32, Seattle Experiment. Whenever I tell people about my 1969 year-long Miami to Seattle round trip, the reaction is always the same. What? I have no answer that makes any sense. Like many experiments, my family's move to Seattle was less than successful. The hypothesis had some good elements, but it was a bit rickety in execution and disappointing in result. Here's the plan. Relocate a growing family of 4 boys at a critical juncture during their formative years to a brand new, geographically distant location with a far more diverse environment and a much broader cultural offering, plus a shockingly different climate. It could have made sense and might have panned out. For innumerable reasons, the result was not as expected. Looking back, I believe it was doomed from the start, or at the very least, had an incalculably small probability of working out. First, the weather was not ideal, with seemingly endless days of gray, cold drizzle usually interrupted only briefly by heavy downpours. When the sun did appear, there might not have existed a lovelier, greener land outside of perhaps the British Isles. But the sun was fleeting, only an occasional, irregular guest. Then there was the mud. The new development my parents chose to resettle in was only halfway complete. There were numerous empty lots and others in various stages of construction. Mud was everywhere. With 4 boys, the result was easy to predict. Soon, the only approved entrance to the house was a storage room at the side on the lower floor, around back. We just called it the mudroom. It was a rather ghastly situation that, given the progress of the hit-and-miss builders, could be with us for an extended period, perhaps years. No one could have predicted it, especially coming from a place where there was very little mud, unless one sought to engage with it on purpose somewhere out in the Everglades. Mom fell almost immediately into depression and spent copious amounts of time barricaded in her bedroom. Somehow, Dad had missed the fact that she had grown up on the beaches of Long Island and lived for 13 sunny years in Miami without concluding that she might be unfamiliar with fog and drizzle and then not a big fan when introduced to them. Within a few weeks, a low mumbling and grumbling started. Her eyebrow began to arch and twitch a bit, and her stare bored into my dad as he ducked and dodged. He had no idea what to do, and was no doubt wondering, early on, just how bright it had been to load up an entire family that had been raised in a sunny realm and relocate them a few thousand miles away to a land famous for murky gloom. American coffee culture originated in the Pacific Northwest. Seattle is Starbucks headquarters. A connection, perhaps? Shortly after moving in, a large and vocal flock of Canadian geese, honkers, decided to make our dock on the waterway behind our house their winter nesting place. With plenty of moisture and grasses nearby, it was apparently an ideal location. The word went out, and even more geese arrived. Soon, the burgeoning colony was out of room, so they extended their domain deep into our backyard. In short order, we had a legion of comfortably situated honking honkers and a stinking mess. Following our neighbor's lead, we placed our small dogs into service. They were eager to race out into the flock on the dock and run the geese off. Our neighbors had Maltese, pugs, and Chihuahuas. We deployed our 3 Yorkies. It soon seemed to be more of an ongoing game of catch me if you can, since the geese would typically get a jump on the approaching Yorkies, only to be alighting again on the dock as soon as the dogs headed inside for some liver snaps and a nap. It was a bit of a mismatch, too. The Yorkshire Terrier, bred in England, was used extensively in the coal mines to kill rats, but a Canadian goose is a very large bird, easily 3 to 4 large rats in size, so the effectiveness was in question, and the risk of serious injury to the goose was minimal. Could one carry off a small terrier in a beak? There was no record of this occurring, but then again, the unusual and unlikely occurred with regularity in our lives. The game of catch continued until one morning when a cold snap the night before glazed our dock with a thin, transparent coating of black ice. With a large gaggle of geese plopped about, warming up for a day of defecation and honking, the Yorkies made their move. Out through the kitchen and down the stairs they sprinted, their tiny toenails scratching for traction on the cold concrete sidewalk. When the one in the lead, Windermere, hit her brakes at the usual spot at the head of the dock, Mom could only watch helplessly in horror as the hyperactive, yelping critter zoomed straight ahead, past a few startled honkers, and sailed right into the frigid waterway. Can geese smile? As surprised neighbors looked on, my terrified mother spurred my dad into search and rescue mode in a dire effort to save one very embarrassed, very cold Yorkshire Terrier. Always the industrious one, Dad grabbed a long gaff laying near the dock, and the stunned Yorkie was plucked from the waterway by her collar and hauled, choking and coughing, up onto the lawn. Shivering and soaked wet to the core, she looked to me like, well, a large rat. She would live to chase another honker. The Seattle experiment was now taking on water and listing heavily to port. Ding's regatta participation flagged and stalled. The sailing was rugged, with a 55-degree Puget Sound as the new playground, and the breezes gusting upon it usually only a little warmer. The regatta scene was frigid, to say the least. Unlike Biscayne Bay, the Sound was not shallow enough to walk across. Further, being busy as a college freshman also made finding the time to get out on the water a challenging affair. Lobster extended his Miami run as a difficult high school teenager, getting into one fray after another. When not tangling with a teacher, my parents would do, he began to experiment with all kinds of new activities, some clandestine, with a new group of friends, only adding to my parents' angst. Oddly, I don't even remember spotting Mr. Horrible once that year. My dad and I loved the place. Finally, we were not sweating. The foggy weather was most welcome after years of broiling sun and suffocating humidity. We enjoyed the rugged Pacific Northwest, with mountains and forests and the friendly, durable people who could always find the bright side of things, even though things were often not very bright. Mom was just not going to make it, though. Exactly 1 year later, we packed up even more stuff than we had moved out with and made a beeline all the way back 3,400 miles across the country to Miami, to another neighborhood about 3 miles from our former one. Of course, my boyhood home was not available, as it had been newly inhabited by the Bob Marley family, of Jamaican descent and mesmerizing rhythms, whose music was just beginning to light up young, peace-loving fans all around the world. In 1992, while perusing the shelves in a brick-and-mortar bookstore in Pittsburgh, I came across a biography of Bob Marley and the Wailers. As I flipped the pages, I found a section with photographs buried about halfway through. With instant recognition, I smiled broadly and wondered if it was actually possible. There, standing and sitting next to one another, were Ziggy Marley and a bushel of brothers, crowded out on the end of the very diving board from which I launched countless high dives, can openers, and front flips some 25 years earlier. I had an old picture, just like the one in the book, pasted in an ancient photo album in a closet at home, with a very different group of boys sitting and standing on that sagging board. Same place, other boys, another time. Right behind them still stood the deadly little pump house, where my dad collapsed and was pulled by the ankles to safety by Mom and me. As I closed the book and placed it back on the shelf, I thought to myself, a small world crammed with several billion people. What are the odds? Go-karts are inherently dangerous vehicles. The one we constructed that Saturday set a whole new standard for potential harm. It's up next, Chapter 33, and it's called Suicide Cart.